Hi, I'm Malcolm Stern, and in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson from Online Events, we're creating a series of podcasts called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. My book of the same name was conceived and inspired by the suicide of my daughter Melissa and the journey that took me on and the internal resources that I found. All of my guests will have a story to tell around overcoming and ultimately thriving through adversity. Special thanks to the band Stairway, Jim McCarty and Louis Chinamo, for the use of theme music from their album Medicine Dance, and my engineer Owen Santiago. I hope you enjoy this series, and thanks for listening. So welcome to my podcast, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. This is the 50th edition, actually, so I'm really pleased with that. We've done a lot, and we've had some amazing guests. These are made in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson at Online Events. And today I'm very happy to welcome quite an interesting character, Joel Bravette. And Joel and I did a podcast on his podcast, Better Beings. And I really enjoyed the dialogue we had. I just felt there was a real kinship. There was an understanding of the way life is that we seem to share. And Joel is in the world of finance, but he's not a typical financier. And he's done a lot of community projects looking to change the way we see how we finance things and what underlies all of this. But I'll let you say more than I do because I don't know much of what I'm talking about here, Joel. But come to you and welcome and good to see you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for such a warm welcome. And I feel honored to be guest number 50, testament to how well you've been doing with the podcast to get to such a milestone. And for me to like land on such a number, let's see if we can make this a special conversation.
Lovely. That's great. So you're very involved with community projects,
Mhm.
and so there's something about your work that really is not just about going, well, how can I make money from things? It's more like, um, how can I benefit the community? And some of the community projects you've been involved with. Well, tell us a little bit about that. What are some of the things you've been doing?
Well, yeah, thank you for and opening the frame to our conversation like that because it is very much where I would like to go. Um, because I think that one, especially in this moment that we find ourselves, I'm aware that you want to keep your content evergreen, so I won't date it or anything. But as a social and a socio-economic moment that we find ourselves in, we are, I find, moving towards a world where empathy has been sucked out of the room and community aesthetic or community ethics, sorry, have been eroding. And so for me, I have long believed that true wealth, and again, like wealth, maybe not in the material sense, but in the
Yeah.
spiritual sense, is found in communion and in like kind of lateral relationship, where we kind of see eye to eye rather than kind of having these asymmetric relationships, which uh, I find prevalent in so many of the mechanisms of our modern world. So I say that to frame that for me, um, I would say suggest that the majority of my working life has actually been spent doing work which hasn't necessarily been rewarding monetarily, but has been so rewarding in helping me become the person that I am today through the lessons that I've learned in those type of relationships. So, for example, um, in recent years, I've been a trustee of the Vegan Society. I am still an ambassador, a youth ambassador for a charity here in London, where I'm based, Made in Hackney, which teaches sovereignty through food to people from underprivileged like backgrounds, particularly within our locale in Hackney. I've worked at the Africa Centre, cultural institution in London as well, which again, while that was an administrational job, there was also a largely kind of like spiritual and community basis on a lot of that work in helping proliferate programs and kind of like different resources for members of the African diaspora, of whom I am one of her distant sons now, via the Caribbean. That's another thing that we can pick up on as we
Yes.
go into the conversation. But yeah, what I would suggest or what I would say is that compassion has been something I've found in a lot of those roles, opportunities, like jobs. And that's not necessarily in how, like, I have delivered on whatever the work or the remit of that work was, but it's actually in the just the minutiae, the cooking with the kids at Made in Hackney, getting to create content to help people, maybe reframe some of their, like health concerns with the vegan society, putting on Africa in the Square in Trafalgar Square with the mayor's office and with, a host of different contributors. But these are all things that, at their heart or at the point of delivery, have all just felt very much that, like, we've created community here. And in those moments is where I would say that I've felt the most joy in my life. And
That's
I
really
think,
interesting because I think the lack of community that we see in the world it's very much my work that I bring people together. I like to think of the work that I do as creating sangha, which is the Buddhist term for
hmm
community
hmm
of with others of like mind, and it feels like you've really thrown yourself into creating community. And does that spring from somewhere? Did something sort of happen to you, or did something occur to you that actually went, I want to give my part of my life energy to helping the community, to creating structures that help people who perhaps are less privileged or who could do with some education in how to manage who they are and how they function.
it's a really good question because I definitely feel that I've come to this place very much from a series of epiphanies of loss in my own life that I've experienced intermittently but powerfully at, along the way. Losing a friend when we were just young in secondary school. He had a brain aneurysm, and it kind of made me realize that, it's not just older people that die. And because I should have, before even he died, losing both of my grandfathers. And now again, I recognize it was the passage of time, old age. They were like old men, but already the familiarity of, these patriarchs of, my maternal and paternal family, experiencing them. Um, and again, it wasn't necessarily the greatest of experiences, but I experienced them nonetheless. And so to experience losing them, like, kind of like really, like, hit me. But then losing a friend, like, just only a couple of years later, when I was 11 or 12, it's kind of like really highlighted the preciousness of life because it's not just old people, young people, like, anybody can die. And so death became a real something that kind of really, I suppose, narrowed focus for me. Also, my dad, for a while when I was younger, his job was he used to create the programs for funerals for people within our wider church community, and so it meant, like, like as I kind of would come with him to go and deliver these programs to people's funerals. I ended up going to like more funerals than probably I should have gone to as someone who was like, 11 and younger.
But actually, that may not be a bad thing because I think that we have a whole sort of thing of death is kept in the background in our society.
Mhm.
And again, it's been one of my passions. I ran a death group for 10 years where 10 years where people would look at death and dying, and one of the women in that group died during the course of our time together, and we tightened around her, and we sort of found a way of befriending death. So I'm hearing from as a young child, death was very much in your environment, including losing your one of your close friends.
Yeah, and I actually I think I mean it's just come back to my head. There was a quote that I remember from the Bible. I was a Bible prodigy when I was a kid. I was, I was very invested in church, but I think there was a quote, like it could be from Ecclesiastes in the Bible. It was like that the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything. Neither shall they have any more reward, and the memory of them is forgotten. Now it's quite dramatic.
A bit bleak as well. So
Yeah, right, right. Like, dramatic and bleak. And I think that it framed my early perception of death to be quite scary. And again, to see a friend, grandparents, other people that I knew, loved, kind of all entering this portal of no return, it was quite scary. Now, to fast forward to where I find myself today, one of my, my living epitaphs is the Stoic memento mori, remember death. And I think that now I re remember death with less of the morbidity, but as a reminder of how we are just parts of a chain, of the generational cycle, the circle of life. And that actually, I think ego death is what we are, I believe, in our human experience, like most scared of. But once you actually take the ego out, death is a rebirth. The death of my Joel identity you can intellectualize and talk on podcasts is gone. But even the nutritional benefit that, my remains will give to the earth, are not to be shied or shirked at. There is something that we are always part of. And so actually, like now, more recently, back to this idea of morbidity, I have a number of like friends, peers, partners who find it suspicious even sometimes that one of my favorite places to hang out and just to chill, relax is in cemeteries.
I'm absolutely with you on that, actually. Interestingly enough, I remember going on a date a long time ago with a woman and taking her to Highgate Cemetery, and I was
Hmm.
fascinated. And what I liked is that she was fascinated as well. And I thought, because I thought that she might find this a bit weird, but I don't think it is weird. I think there's something very profoundly sobering and
Hmm.
almost uplifting around cemeteries. I think particularly Highgate, which I think I don't know if you've been there, but it's an extraordinary cemetery. And Karl Marx is there, and a lot of famous individuals, including the Russian who was murdered. The beautiful There's a beautiful epitaph. I think that's the other thing that I love about cemeteries is the way people are remembered. And I looked at one gravestone and I saw it said so he did his best. And I thought, God, that's a terrible way to be remembered. Whereas other times it's been like, this most beautiful man who I've loved with all my heart. There's something very exquisite around that process.
I don't know, so just to that point, do you think that he did his best is like not a great epitaph?
Well, I just thought, oh, he must be a pretty poor character that's the best thing they can get out of him, rather than he was loved or cherished or he did his best. Sort of, it feels to me if someone says to me, "You've done your best," it means you haven't done that well, but you did your best.
But even if you didn't do well, if you did your best, what more can we give to this life, to this
Yeah, true.
world, to anything than our best? And if that people can even recognize that what you gave was your best, to me personally, I would think that was one of the greater accolades, because that just thinking about your point there, and again maybe this is a conversational segue, but I like to be like inspired and see how that can then fruit into the rest of my thinking day, thinking week. But doing your best, I do recognize that in our modern parlance and in our society, doing your best can be almost a passive aggressive. Oh yeah, he did his best.
Wasn't much good, but he did his best.
Yeah, yeah. But actually, I think if we were to take away that lens of status and
Hmm.
actually and look through a lens of intention, I
Yeah.
think doing your best is everything really, and that's what I would want out of relationships, out of life, and whether or not those things necessarily stack up to he made X amount of money, worked at this company, or did this. I think that if the people around me and the people whose lives that I touched in any way said that he did his best, whether or not that was the only thing they said, whether they said, yeah, he did this, or he like, just know that they thought that I did my best, I think would be a very happy resting place. So
Well, you've reframed it for me, Joel. That's pretty good. I'm not thinking of that as a poor thing, and I think it was because it was quite near Litvinenko's grave, which was he was murdered in his 30s, and his wife. There was such a beautiful headstone and beautiful words. I just was touched by the fact that he was deeply loved.
Mhm.
That's one of the things that I see in. I mean, I love looking at epitaphs on gravestones as well.
Well, actually, to segue back then to the first question about that feeling of love, I think the loss that I've experienced through death has also felt like a loss of love, through my life. And so maybe that's also why the lens for me can sometimes be about what can I give rather than about what can I expect by return, whether that is like, love, reward, treasure, or whatever that might be. Because I like I've yeah, now I find myself in my mid 40s, but fortunately, and like, I'm very blessed to be a father of two like, like wonderful young daughters. But I've lost like, my family, like, the family that I came from, even though I've now created my own, like, through like, through death, circumstance, and other reasons. So I have definitely framed a lot of my perspective in life from an acceptance of loss and recognizing that although that those individual losses to me, like, have like, been seismic to some extent in my own personal development, they are also opportunities to grow and for me to kind of continue carrying. I mean, what are gravestones if not physical touch points of memory for like, something that has gone? And so I think that what I have in my mind or in what I kind of carry with me all the time are like, these stones or these memories of people, places, like, things that I have like lost in my life and like never allow them to lose their relevance, their importance to the shaping of who I am. And so, yeah, in essence, it's like I have my own like graveyard, in my head, but I don't, again, see it through a lens of woe is me, woe is them. I see it as the very same beauty that I see when I visit cemeteries, that actually this is a great place of growth. Some of the best gardens, some of the best, like, unspoilt nature and copses that I have found in London happen to be in cemeteries.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So it feels like you've got a very broad perspective on life. I know that, as I'm now in my mid 70s, and so it's a a long way off. And it's like I'm now looking at what I do with my time. And I used to be very much about how do I sort of like finance my work? How do I make my work make money for me? And actually, what's happened for me, and it feels like it's happening for you at a much younger age. What's happened for me is that how do I does this lift my spirits? Am I contributing something to the community? Does this feel like I'm using the best talents I possibly can? This is now much more for me. Of course, we have to make a living as well, but this is much more for me what work is about. And I won't just do work for money, which is a privileged position I understand as well. But it is nice to be reimbursed for what we do. And I'm wondering what created your connection with the work that you do and how you finance it, especially because you are in finance as well. So I'd be quite interested to hear that.
Yes. So I have found myself now in this financial sphere only recently, really, in the last 2 years, like as such that I would put a title and a name to it that like, finance is the world and what I do. But I would say that even the reason why the opportunity has like, come to me and I've been able to embrace it and take it is because what some of the principals at the venture studio and then even at the investment partnership that I'm part of recognize in me is that I think quite uniquely to a lot of their experiences, they have all had careers and I've just had a life. I haven't had a career in that sense. My life is this patchwork of experiences, projects, learnings, epiphanies, different locales, different groups of people. And if there's one thing that I have done through all of it is I've learned lessons and I continue to bring those lessons through to the next thing. And now I think that when I hear and I speak to many of my friends who we went to the same school, college, and I think it may also be worth mentioning that at college I studied international baccalaureate here in the UK rather than doing A levels. And at the time when I did the baccalaureate, it was there weren't many places that were doing the baccalaureate, but I think it really opened up my mind to the idea that I could be the author of my own life rather than uh, the blinkered idea that you've done your GCSEs, which are 12 subjects, to then do A levels that are three subjects, that then becomes a degree, which is then one subject, and then a career that then follows that. And everything is just kind of narrowed. And sure, you have choice within it, but you have choice of limited options.
Yeah.
And then that is what you now do. And I think that when I then look at so many of my peers and friends and see the crises that they've ended up having, like, with regards to an idea of purpose, to, like, connection with people, in authentic ways, that I can recognize that what has maybe been the barrier to some of the evolution of their personal and spiritual development has been the career, because the career demands so much of them. But obviously as well, it rewards, like, monetarily, like materially. And what I have noticed is that, as people's, like, earning goes up, so often does their lifestyle in accordance. And so in essence, they are kind of leveraged. Like, you can't leave that career, or you can't leave what it is that you're doing, because now you've got yourself a mortgage at this rate, a car, your kids go to this school, they do that, then, and there's all these things that it's like, right, if I did even want to do something different, I'm kind of boxed in by the costs of, like, just existence now. And so I think for me that, like, again, this is using that as a yardstick and an example, is that been an entrepreneur from a young age. I opened my first, like, big business, a bar I had when I was still at university. Um, and the perils, the difficulties of entrepreneurship have been, like, in essence, yeah, fully your own boss, but then also your own, like, bottle washer, your own, like, negotiator, your everything, like, in the business. Really taught me, like, the importance of tightening your belt, like, if you can, keeping your costs as low as possible. Because you never know when any of that surplus that you are then able to, like, amass, will need to be, like, sucked into paying an emergency cost of this or doing that. And so I think that what I learned quite young from that was to live really frugally. But then with the frugality of living like that, by being an entrepreneur from so young, it did actually afford me a freedom to then continue exploring things, knowing that I never really built my life to such a place that there was a material expectation that I could now no longer keep up with. And so that's what's kind of then allowed me over this kind of, like, as I said, patchwork experience, to be everything from girl band manager, hairdresser, yeah, bar owner, promoter. I mean, I've been a public figure, like, with like, edutainment and music. I mean, there's not, aside from things that I take applied and specific, like, knowledge. I've never been a brain surgeon. I've never, like, engineered, like, major structures or bridges. But anything that involves human connection, talking, and a little bit of creativity, I've probably had a dabble. And I think that all of that is then what kaleidoscopes into now when talking to entrepreneurs, investees, and even investors, like, at the startup or pre-startup stage. I can speak with experience of having not only done that and been at every single stage of that journey from inception through to delivery, but I've also kind of, like, I'm not uh, only theoretically talking about pitfalls. I'm talking anecdotally about them, and it resonates so much more when you're talking with people and it's your lived experience rather than the stuff that you learn at your Wharton MBA. So I think that it's been very valuable for me to have kind of, like, accumulated this, like, patchwork life, which I like to think I bring to, like, my parenting, but then also to, like, my mentorships and, like, some of the, like, coaching, and then even the podcast. And like you said, like, at the top of this conversation, when we talked on my podcast, on the Better Beings podcast, how we connected, I think, was because of the different experiences that we've both had, but where we saw similarities in some of them. And then I think that has always been, like, what serves as the cement that brings me together in such a
Yes.
great way with so many people.
I think it's right because I'm just reflecting on my own sort of experiences of many different things in my life. My dad was desperately keen for me to be a professional and sort of paid for an expensive accountancy training while I was in articles, and I just thought, I don't like this very much. It's like it's not what I want to do. And I've sort of like sailed on the Rainbow Warrior with Greenpeace. I was a professional gambler for a while. I've done lecturing and psychotherapy and all sorts of. I worked at a terminal cancer hospice, and I think all of those things have brought me a richness that
Mm.
being in one, strict constraint would not have brought me, except it might have brought me money. And
Yeah.
and I know that we talked about, you talked about your first piece of entrepreneurialship was, if that's the right word, was the bar that you started, but you had quite a story that went with that as well. So perhaps we could actually, because I remember being quite shocked hearing your story of the bar. So perhaps you could hear that from you.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, again, weaving all of these conversations, like, like in and out, all these threads, it's back to the story of loss. Because although I had experienced so much personal loss with, like, friends, family, and others, in my younger life, my bar, which, I mean, yeah, even today, like, I mean, the story is from 2003, 2004, and, like, 20 plus years later, it kind of still, like, has emotional pangs. But to top the story, my bar was petrol bombed by, like, lo Leeds locals. It was in Leeds, in West Yorkshire, where my bar was. It was my university town, as well, or university city. Sorry, to anybody in Leeds who thinks that I am I'm pushing you down. I didn't mean to, but yeah. Um, it had been a very difficult business to start and begin. As I said, it was mine and my business partners, our first real foray into, like, entrepreneurship of this level. I was still a student, with no discernible, like, job or income. And my business partner and I managed to convince, at that time, HSBC to give us £100,000 loan, unsecured, to start a bar and a entertainment, like, venture in the center of town. Now, I don't come from a background where, like, a six-figure sum is like something that you just, oh yeah, but, like, mum, I got 100 grand in the bank for me to build a bar. Like, uh, it was, yeah, it was for me, it was life changing, and it actually added, like, a layer of pressure to my life that I hadn't felt. And back to that point about how, when you are, enriched in this current, like, societal paradigm with money, with whatever it is, that a weight comes with it. Like, you don't just, like, have it. Like, now it's like, what do I do with it? I don't want to mess this up. Like, how am I seen? What does it mean? Like, so all that kind of came with it. And so I was very responsible, because I suppose I had also, having quite, like, God-fearing first generation immigrant, like, Caribbean parents, not
Mm.
profligate people, like, very, very, like, conscientious, very, very, like, abiding by the rules, like, doing things the way that they should be done. So I
Yep.
mean, already for me, like, going out on a limb and getting an unsecured loan while I was still a student and stuff, like, rocked my poor mum's heart, like, what are you doing? Like, what is going on? And especially that, to sell alcohol as well. I mean, that's another thing. But it was a very difficult business. My business partner actually ended up finding the pressure too much, and he ran away, like, skipped the country, uh, with all of the money from the till taking. So he actually left me more in debt than we were. Ran away. I'm now the only signatory left in the UK. Had to build the business up, like, as I said, like, doing the night I was working behind the bar, I was doing the paperwork, I was doing the clean down, like, till 3, 4 in the morning, but then been up at 7 a.m. to get the barrels, like, in, cleaning out the basement, doing every single, like, function just to try and, like, keep costs down, but make sure that we didn't go under, and that, I became liable for a debt that I was unable to now service. So actually, after a while, Channel 4 came along, and actually asked if they could make a TV program about the bar. Uh, and I mean, for me at the time, I just couldn't believe my, my luck that, that I was going to have this opportunity to, I suppose, promo, like, what I was doing to
Absolutely.
a national audience. And again, although that the majority of people probably watching daytime television on Channel 4 aren't likely to have been like, the patrons of my city centre Leeds bar. Like it was still good that so many people saw it because of that, there was like, just like, interest. A lot of people did start coming and it actually started to pick up and the bar started like, to go really well. But then, yeah, unfortunately, as it had started to pick up, the Leeds locals had actually never really taken to me. And there was a particular like faction of Leeds locals who again like I let like your audience like, read into it like but they would always be like go back to London like where you come from like what you doing opening a bar or doing this like in our town it's not and so I kind of would I could feel that there was a vibe that people like kind of had a little bit of anger, resentment, like, about me being this really young and like, very kind of extrovert. I mean, probably you're picking up as well, very talkative, like, young fella, youngest bar owner in town. And so, yeah, it kind of like sadly like ended with some of the Leeds locals like smashing the windows and Molotov cocktail, like, the back bar, whole thing went up in flames. Um, as I said, because I was trying to live so frugally at the time, all of my possessions, like, the things that I'd had since childhood, my memories and everything that like, that I'd brought to university with me, they were all in the building. So all of that got destroyed. So all records, like, my old photographs, like, my all of the things that like, that made me feel like me up until the age of like, 21, 22, were all burnt and destroyed. And so it also felt like a part of me died, like, with that, when that uh, whole scenario happened. And I mean, as I said, I never in the aftermath of it, like, had any therapy, anybody to talk to about it. And so absorbing the loss of the bar and like, the financial responsibility, this economic project was one thing, but the loss of everything that was also in there, then the loss of the life that I'd come to know as this publican, it was the biggest amount of loss that I'd ever experienced in one like moment. But I would say that the little losses that I've been accruing through life, I think are the reasons why in that moment I didn't totally collapse. That I recognized already that actually each time I've bounced back, each time whenever things have gone awry in my life, there has been a time for recalibration, but ultimately I have recalibrated. I have made it back. So it was
Isn't
very,
that what makes us stronger as well? That every time we encounter a loss and find a different part of ourselves,
yeah.
recreate ourselves, isn't that what makes us bigger as human beings?
Exactly that, Malcolm. I mean, I think that, as I said, it's nice to kind of like touch on that, and I think that's maybe enough of that story. But I think what it serves as is a great anecdote of, as I said, the resilience that I think I bring to engagements, to life, to conversations, to my relationships now, because an argument isn't reason for me to walk away. Like it's actually a reason for us to figure it out. Like, let's try and make this work. I think that we have evolved, I would say. I mean, I don't know whether it is an evolution, but we've evolved a modern society where because we have so much choice, people often don't fight for things anymore. But
Yeah.
whether that be like relationships, like experiences, people are like, you know what, I'll just do this instead. But I still believe that things that like that we invest in, that we should like if our investment is based on stuff that we believe in, even if that investment sometimes feels like it's like like not always on the upward trajectory, like it's actually time to double down, like dig deep when it feels like it's
Yeah.
going the other way, because actually those investments are us as much as they are the investment. They are in essence a mirror of like how much we commit and how much we are prepared to give. And so, yeah, I like to think that in difficult moments, like, yeah, rather than burying my head, that I kind of use that difficulty to almost like, absorb myself in it and see how I can kind of grow from it. Because if my history has taught me anything, how I am here today is because of those moments.
So we're coming towards the end of our podcast, which I'm really enjoying. Sort of like the richness you bring to the dialogue as well. And what I can see is that you've sort of like you've had a sort of very rich and varied life.
hmm
And you've also got this very solid financier position now that you're in the financial world. I'm wondering where you see, and maybe you don't see yet, but where you see your life heading from here on in. So you've invested a lot in the community,
hmm
a lot into your entrepreneurialism, and but also now you've got family, and so our lives change and our circumstances change. Where do you see yourself going?
They do, and that's really, yeah. Again, like it's actually the crossroad that I kind of am feeling myself at in this moment of my life. And my degree was in accountancy and finance, so I kind of do have that background. It was also part of why the bank, they weren't foolish in giving me that money. That I mean, we did prove with a solid business plan back at the time. However, not that anyone would get 100 grand unsecured these days. But so I kind of I have that underpinning, like but now in this finance space, I really had to wrestle, especially after spending so many years, like uh in what many would call the social justice warrior space, like
Yeah.
the vegan society, like charities focusing on sovereignty and and impoverished communities and groups. I've thought I would have to look at this capitalist model through a lens that I was able to reconcile my beliefs with, because I what I didn't I and I don't want is to become uh enslaved to the material world and the material
Very
system.
good. Yes.
I've been very lucky that in moments of my life, I've experienced I would consider the highs of what it is to of materiality. The best hotels, the best drinks, the most expensive company or whatever it is that people kind of like look at as yardsticks of success. And I think that most of those moments, as much as I enjoyed them in the moment, they kind of like left me feeling empty afterwards. Like, do I want to live at a forever party? Like, no. Like, do I want any of these things in perpetuity? Probably not. They're great for experiences, but also great for experiences being like, sleeping in a forest with a tent that's blown away and like just having to figure it out. Like, like what makes an experience good or bad? Like, ultimately, it's like, how it impacts you and the memory of it. And so I'd say that the things that I've learned from have been the tougher things have actually been things that I've learned from more. But what I now bring to this financial space is an outlook that investors are always going to want return on their money, and the market's always going to want new and innovative products. So for me, the space where there is wiggle room, where we can kind of like play around in a way that can honor my ideals and objectives for looking after people, looking after the environment, as well as turning a profit, is looking at how we produce things and the provenance of the materials with which we produce things.
Mm.
And so the strategy at the studio and at the investment partnership that I'm at, in both cases, looks at expanding or opening like new markets. One slant particularly is looking at people who traditionally haven't had access to finance, which, surprise, surprise, is basically anybody who's not a white guy. So, I mean, like bringing like women, people like, like non-Western people also as well from other protected, characteristic groups like LGBTQIA, disabled people, people of different, abilities, but people
Mm.
who actually have different insights into like what products or what things might best serve them. Because again, I don't need to go into any anecdotes of so many things that exist in our modern, material environment are things that were invented for the, with the view of the people who invented them, but not necessarily for,
Yes.
a great market fit. Like one that I can think of off the top of my head really quickly, because someone's reminded me recently, was about elastoplast or plasters. And that the reason why plasters are the color they are was to kind of try and match the skin of the people who first created those plasters.
How interesting.
I'd never even thought of that. I just always thought like plasters are just like this weird yellow color on my dark skin. But then I saw that a company who then started creating plasters for different people for their different like kind of like skin tones and backgrounds. Again, in cosmetics, cosmetics were first made for a certain type of face, but then you see a proliferation in those spaces with people like Rihanna, creating a really successful brand because like recognizing that in
Yeah.
cosmetics and in lingerie that there are different body types, different, and so I think all of these things highlight that it's good business sense to recognize that you can try and like force square pegs into round holes all the time, or you can do research and see what like round holes are saying, and then you can make
Oh,
round
interesting.
pegs
Mm.
specifically.
That's a great example you've just given as well. Never would have occurred to me. So we're coming towards the end here now, and there's always a question I ask at the end, and I'd like it to come spontaneously, just off the top of your head
Mhm.
as well, which is, what particular dragons have you had to slay? What obstacles have you had to overcome to be who you are? What's the number one thing you go, yes, that I've found my way through that forest.
I think it's been the running theme of what we have discussed, or what you've kind of dotted in a couple of questions to my soliloquy here.
Yeah,
Um,
you're very loquacious. Really good.
but I would say, yeah, it's been loss. But when I say that, it's see loss as a yoke, because at the beginning of my loss journey, it was very much a like curl up in a ball, cry, like
Right.
like I don't know what to do now, inertia from
Yeah.
loss. But in slaying that lost dragon, and I mean, again, like, forgive me for like, bastardizing your allegory here. But instead of even slaying the dragon, what I did was I corralled the dragon, and now I ride it. Like, it's my
Wow.
it's my dragon now, rather than a dragon that once gave me fear, that I would cower, afraid of its flames, afraid of everything that comes from loss. I've now learned to embrace that, and in the
Just
embracing
reminded me
of
of
that.
Game of Thrones when you said that, actually, Joel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Exactly. Yeah. Dracaris.
yeah.
Um, it has, yeah, it's really good actually, that allegory, because that was that story, wasn't it? That everybody
That was that
was
story. Yes.
the fear of the dragon, but actually like, no, like, ride the dragon, like, be in
Power, it's the
slipstream.
power of the dragon, isn't it? So,
Yeah, yeah. And so I would say that, yeah, even now, like, as, I am, divorced, and so my children, they don't live in the UK, they live in the Netherlands, and so even that, even though I get to see them, and I'm actually off to go and see them in a couple of days, there was a great sense of loss when they left the UK, like when
yeah.
like their mum and I got divorced, and they went there, but I've learned to turn all of these losses, whether they're great, small, lateral, indifferent, like into fuel. And I would not say that that's kind of creating a false positivity around things, but it's instead, I believe, seeing hope. And I think that I can see hope in everything.
Lovely. That's really lovely. It's a great way to finish. Thank you so much, Joel, for joining me today. And number 50, boom, boom.
Boom.
Uh,
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope that for a 50th episode, it was something that you, your listeners, and even me, when I listen back to it, we can all learn from. So thank
it's
you.
sweet, isn't it? And it's perceptive. So I really appreciate it. And we'll catch up sometime soon. Be good to see
Look
you.
look forward to it.
Look
Thanks,
forward.
Falco.
Cheers, Joel. Thanks a lot. See you then.